Everest was the ultimate dream for many climbers. It was the highest point on Earth, a place where men and women pushed themselves beyond their limits to stand on top of the world. But it was also a place of death. The mountain had taken many lives, and their frozen bodies remained as silent warnings to those who dared to follow. One of the most well-known was a man that people called Green Boots. For years, climbers on the Northeast Ridge route passed by a small cave where a body lay, curled on its side as if resting. His arms were tucked close to his chest, his face turned slightly away from the path. His bright green mountaineering boots made him stand out against the snow and rocks. Nobody knew his real name for a long time, but he became a landmark. Guides would tell climbers, "Once you pass Green Boots, you're getting close to the summit." It was later believed that Green Boots was an Indian climber named Suwang Paljor. He had been part of a team attempting to reach the summit on May 10, 1996. The climb had started well. The sky was clear that morning, and they had high hopes of making history by becoming the first Indian team to reach the summit from the north side. But Everest was unpredictable. By the afternoon, the winds had picked up, and heavy snow was falling, making it nearly impossible to see. Paljor and two other teammates continued climbing despite the worsening conditions. Their leader had warned them to turn back, but they were so close to their goal. They wanted to push forward. As they neared the top, the storm became even more violent. The cold was unbearable, cutting through their thick suits, making it difficult to move. Their oxygen supplies were running low, and the wind was so strong that it was hard to stand. The three climbers disappeared into the blizzard. Only one member of their team made it back down. The others were lost to the storm. Later, climbers would say that Paljor had been last seen taking shelter in a small cave near the summit. Maybe he had hoped the storm would pass. Maybe he had been too exhausted to continue. Whatever the reason, he never moved again. His body remained there, frozen in place, year after year. As time passed, more and more climbers passed by him. Some stopped for a moment, whispering a quick prayer before moving on. Others refused to look, afraid that they, too, might become part of the mountain if they hesitated for too long. But many barely noticed him at all. Their minds were focused only on reaching the top. In 2006, another climber, David Sharp, stopped in the same cave where Green Boots lay. He had set out alone, hoping to make the climb without a guide or support team. But something went wrong. He became weak, his body failing him in the freezing temperatures. He sat there next to Green Boots, unable to move, waiting for help that never came. More than 40 climbers passed him that day. Some thought he was already dead. Others didn't want to risk their own lives to help. By the time someone finally stopped to check on him, it was too late. He died in the same place as Green Boots, his body joining the many others left behind by Everest. Sharp's death started a fierce debate among the climbing community. Should climbers stop to help others, even if it meant putting their own lives at risk? Or was Everest a place where only the strongest could survive? Some argued that the mountain was too dangerous for rescue attempts. Others said that human life should always come before personal achievement. But the reality was harsh. On Everest, there were no easy answers. For years, there was another debate about whether Green Boots should be moved. Some felt it was disrespectful to leave him there. They believed his family deserved closure and that he should be given a proper burial. Others said moving him was too risky. The air was too thin, and the terrain was too treacherous. Everest had already claimed so many lives. Why risk another? Then, in 2014, something changed. Climbers noticed that Green Boots was no longer visible. Some believed that he had finally been moved out of respect. Others thought that nature had simply buried him beneath the shifting snow and ice. There were even rumors that he was still there, just hidden from sight. But his story remained woven into the legend of Everest. Even now, those who climb the mountain remember Green Boots. He was more than just a landmark. He was a warning, a reminder of how easily life could be lost at such great heights. His presence made people think about the cost of their dreams. Was reaching the summit worth it if you never made it back? Everest was not just a challenge. It was not just a dream. It was a graveyard in the sky where those who had fallen remained frozen in time, and those who climbed it carried the ghosts of the ones who had come before them. David Sharp shivered inside a small rocky cave on Mount Everest. His body was frozen, and his breaths were slow and weak. He had no strength left to move. He was alone, but not really. Climbers passed by, stepping over his legs, looking at him, and then continuing their climb. Some whispered to each other. Some stared for a moment before shaking their heads and walking on. They all knew he was dying. It was May 2006, and David had attempted to reach the summit of Everest alone. He had little oxygen, not enough warm clothing, and no backup plan. He had made it high up the mountain, but had run out of energy on the way down. The cold had taken over his body, and now he sat here, unable to call for help. Everest's death zone was an unforgiving place. At over 8,000 meters, the air was too thin for humans to survive for long. Frostbite could turn fingers and toes black. The wind could cut through even the thickest coats. And once exhaustion set in, it was almost impossible to recover. David had stopped near the cave where another climber, known only as Green Boots, had died years before. Green Boots' body still lay there, frozen in place. Now, David was becoming part of the mountain's grim history. As the sun rose, climbers made their way toward the summit. Some saw David sitting against the cave wall. His arms were stiff, his face pale. A few asked if he was okay. He mumbled something, but it was hard to understand. His mind was foggy from the lack of oxygen. One climber, a man from New Zealand, paused longer than most. He looked at David and then at the summit. He had trained for years for this moment. He had spent thousands of dollars. If he stopped now, he might never get another chance. But if he kept going, David would die alone. He hesitated, then made a decision. He placed an extra oxygen bottle beside David, but he didn't try to carry him down. He couldn't risk his own life. The mountain was too dangerous. With a heavy heart, he turned and climbed toward the top. More climbers passed. Some felt guilty. Some didn't care. Others told themselves there was nothing they could do. Carrying a half-conscious man down Everest was nearly impossible. It could mean death for both. As the hours passed, David's breaths grew weaker. His fingers and toes were black with frostbite. He couldn't feel his legs. His body had given up. The sun set, and the cold became even worse. The wind howled through the mountain, covering him in snow. Back at base camp, word spread that a climber was dying near Green Boots Cave. Some people were outraged. Why had no one helped him? Others said it was just how Everest worked. People came here to reach the top, not to save lives. By the next morning, David was gone. His body remained in the cave, just like Green Boots. He became another landmark on Everest, a warning to others who dared to climb. When news of David Sharp's death reached the world, people were horrified. Had climbers really walked past a dying man and done nothing? Shouldn't someone have tried harder to save him? The debate grew. Some said it was cruel to leave him. Others argued that it was the reality of high-altitude climbing, every person for themselves. David's family was devastated. They didn't blame the climbers, but they wished things had been different. They knew he had taken risks, but they never expected him to be left alone to die. In the years that followed, David's death changed the way people thought about Everest. Some climbers promised to be more prepared. Others vowed to never leave a person behind. But the truth was, the mountain hadn't changed. It remained deadly, cold, and merciless. Even today, When climbers make their way up Everest, they pass by Green Boots and David Sharp. Their frozen bodies remind everyone of the cost of ambition. The top of the world is a dream for many, but on Everest, dreams and nightmares exist side by side. David Sharp's story remains one of Everest's most haunting tragedies. He climbed to achieve something great, but in the end, he became a warning, a reminder that on the highest peaks, survival is never guaranteed. Mount Everest has always been a place of mystery and danger, but one of its greatest mysteries is the story of George Mallory, a man who disappeared on the mountain in 1924. For decades, no one knew what happened to him or his climbing partner, Andrew Irvine. Did they reach the top of Everest before anyone else? Or did the mountain claim their lives before they could achieve their dream? The answers to these questions have fascinated climbers and historians for years. George Mallory was a British climber who loved mountains. In the early 1920s, Everest was the ultimate challenge for climbers. No one had ever reached its summit, and many believed it was impossible. Mallory was part of a team that wanted to be the first to conquer the mountain. He had tried twice before, in 1921 and 1922, but both attempts failed. In 1924, he was determined to try again. Mallory was 37 years old and knew this might be his last chance. He joined a British expedition led by General Charles Bruce. The team included Andrew Irvine, a young and strong climber who was only 22 years old. Irvine wasn't as experienced as Mallory, but he was good with equipment and full of energy. The two men became climbing partners. On June 6, 1924, Mallory and Irvine set out from their camp to make their final push to the summit. They carried oxygen tanks, cameras, and other supplies. The weather was bad, but they decided to go anyway. They were last seen alive by another climber, Noel Odell, who spotted them high on the mountain, moving slowly but steadily toward the top. Odell thought they might make it, but then the clouds closed in, and Mallory and Irvine vanished. No one ever saw them again. For years, people wondered what happened to Mallory and Irvine. Did they reach the summit? Did they fall? No one knew. The mystery grew over time, and Everest became even more famous because of it. Many climbers tried to find clues, but the mountain kept its secrets. Then, in 1999, something incredible happened. An expedition led by climber Conrad Anker found George Mallory's body on the north face of Everest. The cold, dry air had preserved his remains for 75 years. He was lying face down, his arms stretched out as if he had tried to stop his fall. His clothes were tattered, and his skin was bleached white by the sun. But he was still recognizable. The discovery was shocking and emotional. For the first time, people could see what had happened to Mallory. He had fallen, and the impact had broken his leg and caused other injuries. But there were still many questions. Where was Andrew Irvine? And did they reach the summit before they died? One of the biggest clues could have been Mallory's camera. He and Irvine were known to have carried a camera with them. If the camera was found, the photos inside might show whether they made it to the top. But the camera was never found. Neither was Irvine's body. Some people think Irvine might have been carrying the camera when he fell, and it's still buried somewhere on the mountain. Without the camera, it's hard to know for sure what happened, but there are some clues. When Mallory's body was found, his goggles were in his pocket. This suggests he was descending the mountain when he died, because climbers usually wear goggles during the day to protect their eyes from the sun and snow. If he was coming down, it's possible he and Irvine had already been to the top, but no one can say for sure. Everest keeps its secrets. George Mallory's story is one of courage and mystery. He was a man who dared to dream big, even when the odds were against him. His disappearance has inspired countless climbers to try to follow in his footsteps. In 1953, Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay became the first climbers to officially reach the summit of Everest. But many people still wonder if Mallory and Irvine did it first. Mallory's body remains on Everest, where it was found. Climbers sometimes pass by it, a silent reminder of the mountain's dangers. His story is a haunting one, full of questions that may never be answered. But it's also a story of hope and determination. Mallory once famously said, "Because it's there," when asked why he wanted to climb Everest. Those words have become a symbol of the human spirit and the desire to achieve the impossible. Even today, the mystery of George Mallory and Andrew Irvine captures the imagination. Climbers and historians continue to search for clues about what happened to them. Some believe Irvine's body and the camera might still be found, hidden in the ice and snow. Others think the mountain will never give up its secrets. One thing is certain: George Mallory's story will always be a part of Everest's history. He was a pioneer, a man who risked everything to chase his dream. Whether he reached the summit or not, his courage and determination have made him a legend. And so, the mystery lives on, as big and as enduring as Everest itself.